Hey everyone, Chris here. We're out of the field. We're taking a look at the new FMS F-86 Sabre. This is an 80mm EDF, really nice looking model. It flies nicely, it goes together really easily. And so in this video, we're gonna go through and show you how the airplane flies, and then after the flight, we'll go through and talk about flight controls, CG, all of that, how I've set up the model so that you understand how I'm flying it. I also did a few updates or upgrades, let's say. First of all, you can see, so out of the box, the airplane does not come weathered. I went through and did all of that. And so I used some alclad paints to offset the colors on some of the panels, the smaller panels, to give it more of a natural aluminum kind of look. And then from there, I ended up doing a wash over the entire airframe with raw umber. It's exactly the process that I showed in my Skyray weathering and panel line video. And so you can check that out on how I did all of this. And then I finished it up with some airbrush shading. It totally transformed the looks of the model. And so, you know, that stuff is usually always worth it. It always helps create a more realistic looking airplane in the end. But I did do a couple modifications. And so first of all, I wanted to give the airplane a Korean War vibe because this did operate in the Korean War. This is an iconic paint scheme with the Huff. This is my 1/10 scale Sabre Jock pilot. They're available on my website. They had a modern pilot that came in the model, because the nice thing about it is in the cockpit, this is all plastic here. And so you're not gonna have any gatoring in the cockpit, but what I ended up doing is just using a soldering iron to remove the pilot from the cockpit and then drop this guy inside there, glued to a piece of plywood. Also, out of the box, the landing gear doors remain in the down position when the gear are down. And so I wanted it to cycle more scale. And so I went through and modified the radio setup. I actually pulled out their gear sequencer. I just pulled it out and plugged the retracts directly into the receiver. I plugged the nose gear door servo into the receiver. And then for the mains, the main gear doors are spring loaded. So when the mains close, it pulls the doors closed. And so what I ended up doing is when I cycled these, you can see this fishing line here. This is some braided fishing line. And so I fed the fishing line through the tab that's inside the wheel well, through an eyelet that I glued in there and then attached it to the main doors. So when I cycle the gear, you'll see that everything opens up when the gear go up and then they close again. And so from a modification standpoint, it's not hard to do, but by having that fishing line on the mains, it does tie you into kind of keeping the wings on the model. You could drop some servos in there, but I just wanted to keep it really simple, and it's really effective and it works fantastically. One of the other key points I want to point out on the model is that they have speed brakes back here. They're very effective. They drag up the airplane on the landings, and so do be aware of that. Especially with the flaps down. They are quite effective. They look cool, of course. They didn't quite get the scale angle in the down position, but it's certainly good enough. And so I do recommend using them, especially if it's a calm day on the landings. They're gonna help you slowing the airplane down, dragging it up. And then lastly, I ended up, because we've got such a smooth, they recently repaved our runway, and so you've got ball bearings in the main tires, and so the airplane rolls for days. So I ended up putting a thrust reversing speed controller in here, so that way I don't end up off the end of the runway. And so you don't have to do that. It's just something I wanted to do because I knew, because this is 400 feet, if I touch down midfield, every time I would end up off the end of the runway, and I wanted to avoid that. For the receiver, I'm using an AR-10 360T. You don't need a 10 channel to do all of the stuff that I've done in here. 8 channel is sufficient, but I had the 10 channel, so I did drop it in there. I did program the gyro. The airplane doesn't really need it, but if it's bumpy, it definitely helps a bit. And so otherwise, flying the airplane, you know, Sabres fly nice. They have great presence in the air. The all silver will tend to disappear on you, so you do have the yellow markations to help with orientation, but on a blue sky, silver can tend to disappear. So be aware of that. But I love the Huff paint scheme. That's one that I recall building as a kid in a plastic model form, but otherwise the airplane, you know, it rolls nicely. It slows down really nicely on the landings. You've got the scale landing gear on here, which I love. Knife edges for days. If you get the speed up, it'll just hold the knife edge beautifully, which is typically how Sabres are. Really nice flyer, nice looking model. And so yeah, let's take it out to the runway. We'll get a flight in, and then we'll come back. We'll talk about my control throws, where the CG is and all of that. And so yeah, let's do it.
That was clean.
All right, there it is, the flight. Really nice flying airplane. That landing, you know, on a calm day especially, you could do wheelies for days. And so yeah, it is, like I mentioned, getting bumped around because it's not real smooth there, but even so, just handled it great. And so why don't we come in closer? We'll talk about the CG controls and all of that. So let's take a look at the battery. So the hatch comes off. You've got actually a flush hatch latch, which is really nice. And so I'm using a Roaring Top 6S 6250 pack, and that's more or less in the middle of this area, on the further back side, of course, because of the bigger pack. But that gives a really nice CG on the airframe. The other thing is, because of the size of the pack, I did open up some of the material here just to remove any kind of interference when this sits on the airframe. In terms of the CG on the airframe as a landmark, if you see, this is actually part of the landing gear mount, this rectangle here. And so if you basically just place your finger on the forward side of that, and the airplane is slightly nose down, that feels pretty good from a CG standpoint. I'll put the dimension on the video, of course, but otherwise, in terms of the controls, I am at my mid rates all around for the aileron and the elevator, and then I'm at full rate for the rudder. And so that equates to, for the aileron, 80% with 10% expo, for the elevator, 80% with 5% expo, and then for the rudder, I'm at 100% with no expo there at all, and it does a really nice knife edge. You could actually give yourself more rudder if you wanted to, but in terms of knife edge performance, it's working really well. The other thing is the flaps. I do have a slight up elevator mix on the flaps, and so that is a 5% and a 10% up elevator mix at the elevator with the flaps. And so again, I'll put the dimensions on the video. I did not notice any pitch change with the speed brakes, so be aware of that, but otherwise, really nice flying airplane, really nice looking. And so if you were to go through and do some of the modifications I did, it only makes a nice airplane even nicer. Thanks so much for watching. I've got a link down in the description to everything used in the model and the model itself. If you'd like to see my current scratch build project, you can see that here. And until next time, I'll see you at the field.